Hi everyone. My name is Jenny Simon, and I'm the program manager for the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. Thank you so much for being here today, attending our Tuesday Times Roundtable. The topic today is freedom of expression in Latin America, and our guest speaker is Dr. Alejandro Alvarado Bremer, who is the coordinator of the Spanish Language Journalism Masters at FIU and Associate Professor of Journalism and Communication. He is the Spanish language editor of the South Florida Media Network. He is also co-chair of FIU's Journalists and Editors Annual Workshop. Professor Alvarado has more than 20 years of experience as a journalist and communicator, working for CBS Telenoticias, CNET, Univision, Porter Novelty, and as an independent consultant. Dr. Alvarado was recently named member of the board of directors of Sembra Media, the largest network of native digital news media in Latin America. Dr. Alvarado holds a PhD and a master's degree in international studies from the University of Miami and a bachelor's in political science from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to the New York Times that is sponsoring this event, and delicious sandwiches that you have are sponsored by the Times, so we thank them very much for this opportunity of having this discussion with you. I don't want this to be a monologue. I want this to be more a roundtable. I was invited to a roundtable, so I would hope that there's participation from all of you. And the topic here is the freedom of expression in Latin America. And the first thing that I would like to do, and I will invite you to visit as well, is a website that contains a lot of information about what are the effects of not having freedom of expression in the world. So since 1992, there have been 1,337 journalists killed in the world. If you visit this website, which is the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a nonprofit organization that is based in New York, and it has representations all over the world, including in Latin America, in Mexico, in the primary countries, and in Europe, Asia, Russia, all over the world. And they have a very strict methodology of following crimes against journalists in the region. And they have a very, very singular methodology where you can play with numbers and you can play with the statistics. And you can see, for example, how many journalists have been killed, let's say, in Mexico. And you go, and you can have the option that where the motive is confirmed, which is it was a political motive, or it was a social motive, or a criminally motivated motive, you can ask. You can fill out those criteria here, if it's a journalist or if it's a media network worker, and you can choose Mexico, for example. And once you choose Mexico, it will give you the stats of Mexico. 48 journalists killed in Mexico since 1992. Now, these figures are not necessarily agreed inside Mexico. According to the National Commission of Human Rights in Mexico, there have been more than 200 journalists killed since 2000. Simply yesterday, a day before yesterday, a journalist in Sonora who was following organized crime was killed in Mexico. And there's always this connection, especially in the Mexican killings, between journalists that are trying to uncover the relationship between politicians, government, and drug dealers. once they make the connection, they are actually signing their act of the function. Same thing happens in Colombia. Colombia, it's also, as you know, drug dealers have an enormous presence in the country for a long time ago. And once the journalists start investigating the connection between politicians and drug dealers, they are basically announcing their own dead. In the case of Colombia, there are more than 40 journalists killed since 1992. So the countries that have more killings, and you can play with the numbers in this website, are in Mexico, leading Latin America, followed by Colombia, then Guatemala, Honduras, Venezuela with 9, Brazil with more than 40. In the case of Venezuela, for example, the killings have not been that much. One could imagine they have a repressive government. They have this excluent authoritative system. And you would expect that there will be a lot of killings in Venezuela. But there are not. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, there are nine journalists were killed since 1992. None of them have been killed since 2012. So what do we have in Venezuela? And why did I share those articles with you? What kind of regime do we have in Venezuela? So I'll give you, I don't know if you already read it, the article. I would like to comment some aspects of each one of them with you, and the role that different organizations play in this process of threatening or deterring journalists from telling the truth. So you have two pieces here. Well, one is signed by Alberto Barrera Tisca, which is a writer of Venezuelan, from Venezuela. And what he is asking, it's a very, very interesting question. Is it really possible to know what really happens in Venezuela? What's going on there? Who is reporting reality? Because not only the government that is reporting, there are some journalists that are also reporting an alternative reality. So how do we know the facts? The other piece is how to be a journalist in times of Maduro. Is it possible to be a journalist, an independent journalist, and to tell the truth in times of Maduro? Can you do that in Venezuela? So why don't you take a look at these articles? Do you, all of you, speak Spanish here? Everybody? Excellent. I'll give you, they are very easy to read. If you already did, please tell me. And if not, I'll give you 5 minutes to read the articles, and we will be discussing each one, several parts of them, because there are very interesting elements in the articles that I will discuss, and that will give you a sense of what's going on in Venezuela. And I would like to focus on Venezuela because it's the main issue that is being discussed today internationally in the region. I think Venezuela, it's a key country for the future of South America. Venezuela used to be a democracy with its problems, what used to be a democracy, and it has gone in the last 20 years through a different trend, through a different path of socialism and authoritarianism, excluent, not inclusive, excluent authoritarianism. So take a look at them, and then we will discuss some elements of the article that I found interesting, because to me, as a journalist, but also as a political scientist, it reveals a lot of what's going on in Venezuela. Before we continue, who's studying journalism here? Any journalist? One journalist? Broadcast journalism. Who's studying political science? Political science. Wow. What are you studying? International relations? You? Who else? International relations? Biología? What are you studying? Liberal arts? Math? Mathematics. And you? What are you studying? English. Wow, okay. Marketing. And why were you interested in being here? Anyone? Are you from Venezuela? Anybody from Venezuela? No? From Colombia? Yeah, of course. Yeah? Okay. Okay. Have you been following the recent developments in Venezuela? Do you know what's going on there? Well, it's blackout, but before that, in January, we have a special, very special event happening there. The interim president. So we have in Venezuela a unique situation here. We have two presidents that claim legitimacy. So who is the legitimate president of Venezuela? It depends on who you ask. Exactly. Yeah. So we have two presidents. One, Maduro, who claims to have won the election last year in 2018, in May 2018. But the opposition says that all those elections were a fraud because they were actually controlled by their own government. So it was not an independent organization who was overseeing the election. So it was very easy for the government simply to snap the election and win the election and stay in power. So you have two situations here. You have a legal situation and you have de facto situation. So at the end, what's to be a sovereign state and what's sovereignty? Sovereignty is a capacity of ruling, okay? But it's a legal and real capacity. So it has these two elements with which Maduro and the opposition are playing. Now, what's going on right now with Guaidó? He's trying to gain legitimacy. But the legitimacy has two sides. In order to be a legitimate government, you have to have political legitimacy, that is, you win it through the elections. But if you are an incompetent ruler, they will throw you out because you need the other side, which is the administrative element of legitimacy. So why was sending humanitarian help to Venezuela so critical to Guaidó? Why was so critical according to this concept of legitimacy? To win what?
His capacity to deliver something tangible to the people to prove it.
Exactly.
That the government is not doing it.
That's exactly right. So it was critical to Maduro to stop that. To stop that. Now we learned by the reading of what is really happening in Venezuela that it was not Maduro who burned the buses. That actually was an accident. But for the majority of the people outside the United States, what do we thought? That it was Maduro. That this authoritarian son of a gun was actually impeding that the food that was sent by all kinds of organizations around the world would get inside Venezuela. And this happened, but the reality is not necessarily that. So in this article, what we are discussing is what's the truth. And the problem that we have the two different organizations, two different sovereignties that are formed in Venezuela that are trying to control what's the truth. And that happens with any revolutionary movement, even in the independence of the United States, or even in war. What happens to truth during war? It's killed. The first victim in a war is the truth. Because what you are trying to manipulate, and there are some communications and marketing students here, what you are trying to manipulate is perceptions. Because the Chinese say perception is reality. Is that true? Is perception reality? Is perception reality? Is your reality? And for the government, is that a fact or not? If all the people think at the end that what you say is truth, is that reality or not? What was the principle of Goebbels? Tell a lie once, tell it twice, tell it many times, that at the end a lie will become truth. But you don't have to go to Goebbels, you can go to Giuliani, who's defending President Trump. What did he say the other day, last year? Truth is not the truth in criminal law. So we have to be careful when we study Venezuela and we want to hear about Venezuela. We want to be very, very careful of what we're looking for and who are we looking for. So there are some independent organizations that are quoted in the article, independent journalists, that are, by the way, native digital news media. What does native digital news media mean? That they were born digitally. They were not legacy media. They were not ever physically, in terms of printed media. They were born digitally. And normally there are new enterprises run by young people, basically millennials. No? And they run their operations. They struggle every day because they don't have a lot of money. They depend from donations from the exterior. There are a lot of organizations here in Venezuela that provide money to them, and they are trying to make ends meet every day. But you can trust those sources. You have Efecto Cocuyo, which is run by the woman, the journalist that wrote the second article, which is Luzmeli Reyes. You have Armando Info, who was actually the organizations that reveal a corruption scheme between Mexico, entrepreneurs from Mexico and Venezuela, that was connected with the milk that was being distributed to Venezuela. You have El Pitazo, Crónica Uno, Tal Cual, Correo Caroni, among other news organizations that you can trust, because they are trying to practice journalism that it's unbiased, that it's independent, that follow basically 3 rules of good journalism and of ethical journalism, which are: be independent. First of all, tell the truth. And one that is very, very important: minimize damage. So whenever you are publishing something, when you are publishing something against someone, you are always having the risk. You are risking the honorability of this person. So if you claim that someone is corrupt and you didn't check the facts, and you publish that, you can damage the reputation of that person perhaps forever in their life. They can sue you, but the damage is done. So that's why when you really are doing journalism, and it's in your spirit to do independent journalism, you are looking first for the truth, and you want to minimize damage. And then you will follow a technique. So a technique that is really very difficult to follow. So with the emergence of citizen journalism, and when we legitimized the term of citizen journalism, we really didn't know what we were doing. Trying to be very, recognizing the effort of citizens doing journalism. But journalism, it's a very difficult discipline that requires rigor, that requires investigation, fact-checking. Is basically as math. It's like adding numbers or working on an equation. Basically, you have to have the facts right. So what these guys are doing in Venezuela, they are trying to exercise independent and truthful journalism, which is very hard to do, especially in the environment that we are viewing. Now, in the case of Venezuela, as you can see, there are not a lot of deaths. So the government is not interested in killing anyone, in killing any journalists. And they know that the influence that these journalists can have is limited because of several factors. One of them is the level of penetration in the internet among the majority of the population. You have to have some kind of connectivity. On the other hand, they can manage the strength of the signal, so they can limit the information. So they are not very scared about what they can publish or not. And they already got rid of all the free press that used to be in Venezuela that were the really influential. The last big one was El Nacional, who went out of money and the owner had to close it. And because newspapers are still influenced in Venezuela, radio is still influenced in Venezuela, and television is basically, and radio are controlled by the government. So, and then there's where the second piece that I share with you comes to front. And that was, there's one specific concept that I would like to discuss with you. When you have an authoritative government, normally you have one element of it, you have two important organizations that you want to really take a look at. One is the military, which in Venezuela is very extremely well organized, which is the only country in the region that didn't experience a guerrilla war. Costa Rica, because they don't have an army. It's an open society. And Venezuela, because they were implacable. Implacable. In the sense that they demobilize any threat in its beginning. And to have that, you need an amazing intelligence service. An intelligence service that prevails and that copied the model of Cuba. So basically, the Cubans' advisement to Maduro and to Chavez was how to build this intelligence agency that would be all over the society, the Venezuelan society. I know some models of intelligence organizations. I know very well the Mexican organization, which today has been dismantled by President López Obrador, basically, because what they were doing for years, they were basically following every journalist in Mexico. And not every journalist, every social organization that was threatening the model of the PRI, which used to be the ruling party and that ruled Mexico for 70 years, until the year 2000. In the case of Cuba, together with the Mossad in Israel, is the best intelligence service in the world. These guys penetrated the entire society, and they have eyes and ears everywhere. And they have their own internal publications. You know, in Mexico, it was called Bucareli News. Bucareli because it's the street where the Ministry of Interior is placed. So it was the Bucareli News, and they have agents that were distributed all around the country, and they will write their own newspaper with the news that will matter to them for the Mexican officials. So the president of Mexico will receive the Bucareli News, and all the top government officials in Mexico. Same thing happens in Venezuela. They have the eyes and they have the ears, and they will report any incident that they think, according to their model, threatens their national security. So the law in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Nicaragua, in Cuba, everything that threatens the national security, which is the well-being of the state that is being operated by these few hands, everything that they think that might threaten becomes a national security threat. And anyone that is threatening that can be killed, not in the case of Venezuela in the last 8 years, 7 years. Yes, for example, in the case of Mexico, but they are not killed by the government. They are killing basically by the criminal organizations. They are implacable. Which, by the way, 9 of every 10 journalists that it's killed, the case remains unsolved all over the world. So nobody knows what happened. Because this is professional killing. You are not dealing with amateurs. Okay? The assassins, they are professionals. And they will leave no trace of the killing. That's why it's so difficult. Because you don't only have the governments and the judiciary system investigating the killing. Sometimes they are in collusion with the organizations. Sometimes they are not. You also have international organizations. You have the United Nations. You have the Committee to Protect Journalists. You have DART. You have foundations that are sponsoring investigations. Even with those resources, it is very difficult to find out who killed them. And in authoritative systems, and in authoritarian systems, it prevails a culture of impunity, where it's very difficult to present charges against politicians because they are very well protected. You have a question? I think it's both. I think it's both. I think it's both. They're fantastic criminals.
There's a lack of motivation to actually find the truth in the first place.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But it's also the level of sophistication of the crimes. It's very difficult. I have had friends in Colombia when the most dangerous times of Colombia in the 90s. There were a lot of journalists killed. And it was very, very difficult to find out who was behind the killing. You might find the killer, but who ordered the killing, that's very difficult to find. Yes? Absolutely. Absolutely. And the criminal organizations work like that. And especially if they are neighborhood based. If you denounce a crime in these situations, your entire family is being threatened. So people, they think twice before making any statement before the judiciary. They are very careful because they are immediately threatened. So the role of the intelligence service, it's key, and it's a key element of the Bolivarian revolution to keep these guys in power. The other condition, which is a sufficient condition to remain in power, is the strength of the government. There's an author that has written a lot about this. Her name is Theda Skocpol. And she says that revolutions happen when the coercive power of the state diminishes. So do you see that the coercive power of the Venezuelan state has diminished today? They're using coercive power. That's not necessarily the formula for a revolution to rise. You need several conditions. The first thing that you need is revolutionaries. That's one condition. The United Nations estimates that in the case of Venezuela, we will have in the next year 5 million Venezuelans outside the country. What does that mean in terms of creating the conditions for a revolution? Who are these guys that leave the country? Who are the guys that come to Miami to live? The middle class and the rich. The guerrillas, where do they come from historically? Historically, they are educated. Anyone. Osama bin Laden, where did he came from? Educated, super educated, from a very wealthy family. Fidel Castro, where did he came from? Was he poor? He was dying of hunger, and that's why he became a revolutionary? No, they were educated. They come from colleges. They organize the revolution through an intellectual capacity to organize. People that are hungry, they are not thinking in revolution. People that are hungry, they are thinking of what they are going to eat the next day. That's their focus. Their capacity to organize and to mobilize is very limited. And if the government has the resources to give them food, the situation is full because they are buying loyalty. So that's what clientelism is all about. You are buying loyalty, and you are buying social support, and you are building your legitimacy through administration, not through elections. When Fidel Castro found out that through administration he could govern the country forever, he forgot about elections. Why do we need them? We feed him, we organize them, we dismantled their traditional ways of thinking and of organizing. We create our own forms of indoctrination. So kids will leave their families when they were kids at the end of 10, and they will become part of the Cuban state through the education of the revolution. That was administration, basically. So you don't need elections. And that's what Maduro is thinking. I don't need elections. If I have the money, that's why Rubio, the Senator Rubio, and the other senators and the politicians here in the United States and the exile, they want to target all the income of the Venezuelan government. Because it's crucial for them to have this income. Because it provides them the resources to survive and to keep loyal, paid, military paid, all the Congress and this assembly, constitutional assembly paid, all the bureaucracy paid and loyal, and besides that, with all the socialist structure of providing health, education, and food, basically their survival is guaranteed for the years to come. So nothing is going to happen in Venezuela in the next years in the sense of having a revolution or having a dramatical political change because they are still in charge. Now, there's a discussion of what's the role of the journalist. So should the journalist will become an activist and a politician? Or should the journalist remain a journalist, independent, committed to the truth? What's your thinking? Anybody? Yeah? Well, there's a discussion, there's a serious discussion here in Miami towards if you need to be an activist and if you want to try to be objective by telling the truth or not. Objectivity is in question in journalism. So if objectivity is in question, what should journalists report about? The problem here in Miami, the problem that we have in Miami is that it's very difficult to recognize any merit, any advancement in what authoritarian governments can do. You are condemned to be segregated. There's an example that I would like to share. When Radio Caracol came here to Miami to start reporting news, they came with this open idea of an independent broadcasting radio network. And they started to give reports about what was going on in Cuba. And obviously, who are the main sponsors of anything that happens in Miami? So Radio Caracol was forced to change its perspective of things in a couple of years, very fast. Because why? They were losing sponsorship. And they were not gaining any new sponsorship at all. So if I'm from Venezuela, for example, and I start trying to report things in a very balanced way, giving each side its opportunity to present their truth, their version of facts. And in one moment, as a journalist, I recognize that there are some things that are well done by Maduro. I would last 5 minutes in the job. Because that's not the way that things want to be told here in Miami. For here in Miami, we have a perspective that it's dominantly conservative and dominantly with a perspective of what is called neoliberalism. Not necessarily, but it basically Miami, it's an example, although you can say that it's countrywide with different emphasis. But it's difficult to practice independent journalism here as it's difficult to practice independent journalism anywhere because of the forces that enter into play. Now, it was said by Benjamin Franklin, if you want to tell the truth, you want to create your own journal, your own newspaper. Okay, but once you live in a capitalist society where you need sponsors and you need the participation of others to continue with the business, you have a line, an editorial line. And that's why we have a different perspectives. So getting from these different perspectives, it's a way to actually learn what's going on. So in the morning, I had to read Fox News, and I have to read CNN, and I had to read CNBC, together with the Miami Herald and the New Times, to learn what's going on in Miami and in the world. Because one perspective is not enough. So whenever you are studying any country, which in this case was Venezuela, don't trust one, be very critical, and don't trust one source. Trust the ones that you think that are independent, that are struggling to survive, that are really making a difference in the way that you see things, that they provide you with context of what's going on, and they provide you with the facts, and that those facts can be verified through investigation. So it's difficult to be very well informed, but it's not impossible. So thank you very much for being here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.